Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
See me by the river, praying over storms. It's hard to let go of the things I think I need. And if I lose my vision, may I use your eyes to see just where it is I need to be. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going. It's made a life of standing in the way of all the beauty this world has worth knowing. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going. Truth will keep on shining like the morning sun, brighter than troubled winds can blow. And if you lose your vision, you can use my eyes to see just where it is you need to go. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going. It's made a life of standing in the way of all the beauty this world has worth knowing. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going. And oh, we're finally free to know the gravity, but we can overcome, we can overcome, we can overcome, we can overcome. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going. It's made a life of standing in the way of all the beauty this world has worth knowing. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going.
Hey, good morning, Crosspointe. Hey, just up front, want to offer you a few announcements. If you participate online, but you've been looking for a way to maybe connect with some other people at Crosspointe who also participate online in different ways at different times, I want to let you know that on Monday nights at 7:30 p.m. every Monday night, there's an online lobby, a group of people who get together from Crosspointe just to connect with one another, to discuss the teachings and just discuss life. And so if you're looking to connect with some other people, and maybe you're participating in all sorts of different ways across the world, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Monday nights, this group of people get together. And so you can find that link in the YouTube description. You can find it in the Saturday email that comes out from Crosspointe, the link to that. And so just want to invite you to that community if you're interested in connecting with some people in that way. Also, if you were looking for a way maybe to volunteer in person, I know many of you participate both online and in person, but the coffee house on campus, Roasted and Toasted, is going to be closing shop at the end of May. And so we are looking for some volunteers who would be willing to help us make coffee, and to provide that, as we try to provide that each and every single week free to people in our Sunday morning gatherings. And so if you're looking for a way to maybe even serve just once a month, and you recognize the importance of what caffeine does and the necessity that it has become for many of us on a Sunday morning, and would love to serve and be a hospitable presence in that way, you can go to crosspointe.org/volunteer. You can find information about how to sign up for that there, as well as many other opportunities about how to serve throughout our community. And then lastly, if you're willing to contribute financially to this community that helps fund all that we do together to love and to serve people in our world, you can go to crosspointe.org/contribute. You can find a variety of ways that you can contribute there. But we really do believe that leveraging our generosity together, we can do way more good in the world by bringing and leveraging that generosity and resources together than any of us can do on our own. So for the teaching today, I want us to explore what faith looks lived out in an actual life. Because many times we can have this expectation that the Bible should give us all sorts of steps and formulas for what it looks like to be a person of faith. But the problem is the Bible doesn't really do that, ever. Instead, what it offers most is stories. These narratives of people's lives as they've lived out faith and as they've journeyed with God. And what we discover is that all these people in the Bible, they lived complicated and confusing lives. And frankly, that's a good thing, because that makes sense to us, right? Like, life is complicated and it's often confusing. And in the midst of those journeys, what we find are people stumbling through with God, just doing the best that they know how at any given time. And so with that in mind, what I want to explore that with you today by looking back through several moments in one particular person's life that we find their life intertwined with the life of Jesus. He's called a few different names throughout the scripture. Sometimes he's called Simon, sometimes Simon Peter, Simon son of Jonah, other times just Peter. And as I walk through this, I just want to acknowledge that I'm really grateful to a scholar named Kent Dobson. He's done some great studies on Peter's life, and I'm going to share some of his thoughts throughout. But if we look at the 30,000-foot view of Peter's life, we first meet Peter in the scriptures as a very simple fisherman, fishing on a small lake. And then the last thing that we know about Peter's life from church historians is that Peter ended up dying as a martyr, being crucified by the Roman Empire. Now, when you think about it, that's quite a journey from being a simple fisherman on a lake in the far corner of Israel to being seen as a threat to the most powerful empire in the world at the time, and eventually being crucified and killed in Rome at the hands of Caesar. And so I want to take a few moments and explore what the journey looked like in between those points. How did that happen? And so let's start with what Luke records when he writes this in chapter 5, verse 1 of his gospel. One day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, with the people crowding around him and listening to the word of God, he saw at the water's edge 2 boats, left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and he taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." So, this is the first time we know of Peter meeting Jesus. And Peter seems a bit skeptical of him, and rightly so. Yet at the same time, he's been listening to him teach, and perhaps he's a little impressed at what he's heard, and so he's conflicted a bit. And so he says, you know what, Jesus, we've been doing this all night. I really do think we know what we're doing. Like, I'm a professional at this, but you know what? Because you say so, I'll let down the nets. Verse 6, when they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. And when Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." Now, I want you to pause there for a second, because now the word Lord there isn't Lord like Lord God. It's a term of respect. It's sir, it's master. Continues verse 9. For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on you will catch men." So they pulled their boats up on the shore, left everything, and followed him. Other gospel writers record Jesus as saying to Peter, "Come, follow me," in this moment when they relay a similar story. And so Peter leaves his boat and follows Jesus. But look again at what Peter says there. He says, "I am a sinful man." He doesn't say I'm naughty. He says I'm sinful, I'm deficient, I'm broken, I need help. Now think about that. Isn't that an interesting response? He does what Jesus says, puts the nets on the other side of the boat, catches a huge amount of fish, and then in response makes a comment about himself. He doesn't say, "Hey, Jesus, how'd you do that? Are you some kind of magician or wizard?" He doesn't say, "Oh, you know what, that's just beginner's luck. You know what? I've been doing this for years. You just got lucky." He could have responded a ton of different ways, but he doesn't say anything like that. He says, "I am a sinful man." So I'd suggest that as we look at the question, what does faith look like? Part of what faith looks like are moments of self-awareness, where you start to wake up and realize some things about yourself. No hiding behind anything, no hiding behind a name or a bank account or a confident bravado or a degree or past achievements, no spin, no excuses. Just this moment of, yeah, this is my reality. And so in this particular situation, faith seems to look like more of a moment of self-awareness, a waking up. But here's the thing, it's hard to take an honest look at ourselves in the mirror. And because it's hard, we tend to avoid it many times. It's one of the things that so often cripples us in life. But when we can stop the hiding and the excuses and the impression management that we're always trying to spin for people, we can embrace, wait, this is the reality of who I am. Both the beautiful things and the strong things, as well as the flaws and the broken pieces. And there's so much tremendous freedom in that when we get to the point of simply acknowledging, yeah, this is who I am. And what we discover is that same thing was a catalytic moment of faith for Peter. But let's look at another story, as recorded by the author Matthew. Jesus sends the disciples ahead of him on a boat so he can escape the crowds for a bit and have a few moments of solitude to pray. A storm sweeps up on the disciples and they're rowing across the lake. And we read this in Matthew chapter 14. It says, "During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. 'It's a ghost,' they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, 'Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid.'" Now, listen to what Peter says. "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Jesus, if this is you, I want to try doing what you're doing." Verse 29, "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. So, what does faith look like? Sometimes it looks like God's Spirit inviting you to do something. To step out of the boat and try it. Without having all of your questions answered, when you don't have it all figured out, when you don't get an explanation beforehand about how everything's going to work out behind the scenes or how it's going to work out in the future, or any guarantee that it will work out at all. But God's Spirit inviting you to do something and you just try it. Now, what happens to Peter when he does that? It seems he starts to walk on the water for a few moments, but then what happens? He begins to sink. And so he cries out, "Lord, save me." And what does Jesus do? He reaches down his hand and he helps him. So what does faith look like? Well, in Peter's first encounter with Jesus, it looked like a moment of self-awareness. But in this moment, it looks like Peter trying something. Jesus inviting him to try something and Peter just trying it. Do you ever notice, though, as we grow into adulthood, that just gets harder and harder sometimes? We start weighing out the pros and the cons of something that we feel like God might be nudging us to do, something that we feel deep in our spirit, something Jesus teaches leads to life, and we start wrestling with, well, what will it cost if I actually stand up against this injustice, if I actually speak out here? I mean, what will people think if I fessed up to what really happened, if I refused to cheat this particular client? What would people think if I chose just to be extraordinarily generous to this particular cause, or if I forgave this person or adopted this child, if I stayed in this situation or left this situation? If I followed the Spirit's nudging and went in a different direction with my career, what will people think? Will I look foolish? Will I look naive? What if it doesn't work out the way that I want? Think about it. Ultimately, if we're trying to measure the success of Peter's effort on the surface, one may say it didn't go very well. After all, he did start to sink. But in that particular moment, faith for Peter looked like a good attempt. Doesn't mean he got it all right. It doesn't mean trying it meant everything would go smoothly. It just simply means he had a willingness to try, a willingness to get out of the boat and try. And sometimes that's what faith looks like, where you just try it. You try something that you think God's Spirit is nudging you toward, that it lines up with the character of Christ, the fruit of the Spirit. And if it doesn't work out for you the way you initially thought or hoped, that's okay. The same was true for Peter. But you try and you see what happens. Later on, we found another story in Matthew's account. Now, this would have been about 3 years into Peter's journey with Jesus from when he first met on the lake. And Matthew writes in chapter 16, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven." Now, pay attention to how it says Peter learns that Jesus was the Messiah. Jesus tells him, this wasn't revealed to you by any man. You didn't figure it out by going to seminary. This was revealed to you by my Father in heaven. And so according to Jesus, God reveals this to Peter. He didn't earn it. He didn't study for it. He has this moment of insight given to him in some type of transcendent, mystical gift of awareness. And maybe you've had a moment like that before, where you suddenly had this aha type of moment and you were like, oh, wow, there's just something I can't logically explain here. This is something bigger than me, outside of myself. And sometimes it just happens and you don't really know how to explain it to anyone. You can't really even explain it to yourself. Something just clicks and somehow you know deep down in your bones. Sometimes that's just what faith looks like. But then there's other times where it looks more like a deliberate choice or a decision. We see that in Peter's first encounter with Jesus, when Jesus says, "Come, follow me." And it says Peter left his nets, left his boat, and followed Jesus. There wasn't this big emotional invitation. There was no swell of music. There wasn't this big aha moment of insight. It was just a choice, a decision to follow after Jesus, to become a student of Jesus. And sometimes that's what faith looks like, just a choice, a decision. This is the direction I'm going to go. And the thing is, one isn't better than the other, or one isn't more spiritual than the other. They're just different. But look back at the story for a moment. Because immediately afterward, Peter comes to this understanding and declaration. Jesus casts this huge vision for Peter's life and gives him this significant responsibility. Jesus says to Peter, "And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And so there's a lot to unpack there that we don't have time to get into, but Jesus speaks this massive vision over Peter's life. And then we read this, verse 21. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. So, not exactly what you're expecting if you're Peter or one of these disciples. I mean, if you're Jesus, you've just acknowledged that you are the long-awaited Messiah, and now suddenly you're talking about being killed. And those two ideas did not go together in Jesus' students' minds. In the disciples' minds, that didn't go together. So verse 22, Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. Now, just a moment ago, Peter had in mind the things of God, right? Jesus said, man did not reveal this to you, but God in heaven did. Peter had this divine insight given to him by God. And then the next thing you know, Jesus calls him Satan, which in Greek there, it means the accuser or the hostile opponent, and says to Peter, you don't have in mind the things of God, you have in mind the things of men. You see, what happens here is Peter just misses the point. He has this divine moment of understanding, and then he turns around and he completely misses the point. He gets it wrong. So, as you and I look at what does a faith journey look like, sometimes it looks like missing the point. And sometimes it looks like just flat out getting it wrong. Because that's life. Sometimes you and I will miss the point and get it wrong, and so we learn from it and we move forward. That's just part of the journey. And we see that all the time in people of faith. That's part of my story. It's part of Crosspointe's story and countless other followers of Jesus, where at times we just miss the point. Now, does that mean you toss out everything else? Other good things that are happening, other good things that have been taught, said, or done? No, it may mean they're just like Peter, that we're like Peter, where you can go from saying, Jesus, you're the Messiah, to Jesus saying to Peter, you're against me, in just a matter of moments. Ups and downs are just part of the faith journey. They just are. You're going to miss the point sometimes. So will I. We all do. It's just part of the journey. A little bit later on in the story, we find Jesus eating a meal with his disciples, and toward the end of the meal, Jesus announces that one of them will betray him. Then he gives them this picture of communion, telling them that his life is about to be sacrificed and poured out. So they dismiss from the meal and head out toward the Mount of Olives just outside of Jerusalem. And then Jesus says this in Mark 14, you will all fall away, Jesus told them. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Peter declared, even if all fall away, I will not. I tell you the truth, Jesus answered. Today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times. But Peter insisted emphatically, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the others said the same. And you can see Peter's boldness, just like when he got out of the boat. But look what happens when we fast forward the story a bit. Jesus has been arrested. Peter's hanging outside the courtyard, trying to watch as Jesus is taken before the government officials. And we read this in verse 66. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. You also were with that Nazarene Jesus, she said. But he denied it. I don't know or understand what you're talking about, he said. And he went out into the entryway. When the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing around, hey, this fellow is one of them, one of Jesus' students, disciples. But again, he denied it. After a little while, those standing near said to Peter, surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean. He began to call down curses on himself, and Peter swore to them, I don't know this man you're talking about. And immediately the rooster crowed the second time. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times. And Peter broke down and wept. Now remember, this is the same guy who said, "You are the Messiah. I will die with you. Even if everyone else falls away from you, I'll never disown you. I will never betray you." But here, a few hours later, he's saying, I don't know that guy. I don't know that Jesus at all. Now, perhaps it's tempting for someone to think, well, okay, at this point, this is where Peter lost his faith. But rather, I'd just suggest to you, I think this is just part of Peter's journey. Because here's the thing, I found in myself and in walking with others on faith journeys all these years, there's plenty of moments where in different ways, we just distance ourselves from Jesus. Where we can want nothing to do with Jesus or God or anything associated with God's followers or Jesus's followers. And sure, there were moments where Peter said yes to following, but there were also moments when he just said no. And if that's been you or is you now, perhaps you feel like that's some mark against you where you can't be honest about that and still belong. Listen, it was just part of the journey for Peter. And I'm convinced it's just part of the journey for you and I. Now, one last encounter I want us to look at. Jesus has been crucified and resurrected, but Peter hasn't seen him alive yet after his death. Another follower of Jesus, John, records it this way. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told the other disciples. And they said, "We'll go with you." So they went out, got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." And when they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Now, it's probably important that we recognize the familiarity and parallels of that moment. Remember that first moment Jesus meets Peter at the lake and invites him to follow him and tells him to do the same thing with this net. I'm sure that flashback isn't lost on Peter in the parallel of those moments. Verse 7, "Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, 'It is the Lord.' And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say, 'It is the Lord,' he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water." Now, isn't it interesting that Peter doesn't even try to walk on the water this time? It seems he's like, I'm not even really sure what happened last time, so I'm not even going to try to walk on the water. I'm just going to go with what I know. And so he just jumps in. And even with the certain guilt that Peter would surely be carrying around with him for betraying Jesus, when he sees Jesus for the first time afterwards, he doesn't hide from him. Rather, he swims out of the boat. He jumps out of the boat and swims toward Jesus. They share a meal together, and Jesus again casts a vision for Peter's life and how he wants him to lead his followers moving forward. And for the next 20 to 30 years, there's plenty of other ups and downs until we eventually find Peter in Rome before Caesar, being sentenced to death by crucifixion for his confidence and loyalty to Jesus. So what do we do with all this? Again, as I said up front, I didn't want to try to define what faith is, but rather I just want to explore what it looks like lived out in a person's life, and specifically someone who was about as close to Jesus as you could get. So, let's review for a moment what faith can look like. Apparently, it can look like a moment of self-awareness, an honest look in the mirror. It can look like a good attempt, getting out of the boat and trying something that God's Spirit has been inviting you to do. It can look like a divine moment of insight. It's kind of aha moment where you humbly realize that there's something bigger and more mysterious at work or going on. It can look like a choice, a deliberate choice to follow after Jesus, to say, I'm going to become a student of Jesus and stand with the marginalized and the oppressed, to wake up and live in the freedom and grace that we're invited to live in, to prioritize love as the most powerful force in the universe. It can also look like totally missing the point and just getting it wrong. It can look like a moment when you walk away, when you say no, when you say, I don't want to be associated with any of that anymore. It can also look like a return where rather than letting the shame of your past paralyze you, you swim back toward grace and love, and you trust that there's room at the table for you. Because here's the thing. Apparently, faith looked like all sorts of different things in Peter's life. And so why wouldn't the same be true for you and I? Now, a couple more observations I want to offer you. One is that faith really is a journey. It's a long journey where you're going to have moments of oneness and moments of isolation filled with ups and downs, some amazing moments and some challenging moments. And no matter where you're at on that journey, you live with the awareness that you belong. That all of it belongs, your doubts and fears and hopes, all of it belongs. And if you find yourself feeling completely separated from God, know that Peter did too. When you have moments of great courage and boldness, when you have moments when you struggle and shrink away, even walk away, Peter did too. And Jesus can handle all of it. And this Crosspointe community can handle all of it. That's just part of the journey. And then secondly, here's something that I think is worth considering. Let's think about, why would Jesus task Peter with leading the first movement of the church? Why, of everyone he could choose, why Peter? Now, I'm sure there were plenty of reasons, but here's one that I'm especially grateful for. In choosing Peter, it was someone who understood grace. Because just imagine if Peter's story never faltered from the moment when he declared to Jesus, "Even if all fall away from you, I never will." Imagine if he lived up to that. If he actually lived up to that, then a central figure in the beginnings of the church could have easily headed down the path of some religious elitist, some legalistic religious leader, someone who relied on his own commitment and devotion to God, whose message could have been to others when times got difficult, "Hey, you know what? You just need to buck up like me and get it done. I said I wouldn't waver and I didn't, so you just need to suck it up and do it." But instead, Peter's life was marked first and foremost by grace, where Peter learned not to depend on his own love and his own resolve and his own commitment to Jesus, but rather he learned to depend on Jesus' love and commitment to him. That's why he could jump out of the boat and swim to Jesus after everything that had happened, because he had learned to trust Jesus' love and commitment to him regardless of his own ups and downs. So here's how I'd like us to spend the next few moments together. I want to invite you to grab something to write with and something to write on. If you need to hit the pause button on this video to go and grab something and then come back, feel free to do that. But here's what I want to invite you to do. I want you to take a moment and I want you to draw a timeline on a piece of paper, a tablet, or whatever you've got. So essentially just kind of a horizontal line straight across the middle of the page. And then I want you to create some time intervals, some short vertical lines that go perpendicular across the line, and mark the intervals with some type of time frame. Maybe it's every 5 years. Maybe give yourself a starting point. Maybe start when you're around 5 years old and just mark out, 5 years of your life and kind of go along the line there to wherever age you're at currently. Now, this is just for you. You don't have to share it with anyone, but I'm going to give you a couple minutes of reflective space. And what I want you to do is I want you to reflect back on your life. And I want you to plot out some different moments on your journey. And so maybe you put a dot above the line at a particular point where you were feeling really connected to God. And then maybe there were points along the way when you just felt kind of rather neutral. And so maybe you put that kind of maybe right on the line. And then there were some points when you felt especially disconnected. And so maybe you put those plot lines underneath it. Whatever it is, you don't have to write down and describe what each of those moments are, but you can if you want to, if that's helpful for you, or maybe put some initial or symbol to kind of remind you what they are. But I want you to take these next few moments and I want you to reflect back over your life. And I want you to create a series of plots on the timeline. So just put marks, again, when you felt especially connected to God, or maybe super connected, or very disconnected, or slightly disconnected, just kind of along the way at certain key moments of your life. Think through that, mark them on your timeline, and just take a few moments and do that now. So we're going to play some music, give you just a couple minutes, pause, and take the time to do that. Now, obviously, since we're online, it doesn't work for me to ask you a question and have everybody raise their hands, but here's what I'm pretty confident of. If you were to draw a line to connect all the different dots on your journey, I imagine that line wouldn't just go straight up and to the right, where things from the beginning of your journey, just things got better and better. You always felt more and more connected to God as time went on, because in 27 years of pastoring, I can't recall a single person who that's been their experience. Rather, what we find for all of us is that it's a journey of ups and downs, of feeling connected and disconnected. It's just all part of it. It just is. Now, I want you to look back on that timeline, and I want you to think about, are there any moments that you look back on and cringe a bit? Maybe you felt super connected to God at a particular moment, but now you look back at how you saw the world or things that you believed or how you were thinking during that time, and you think about that and you kind of cringe a bit. Even though you felt super connected to God, you look back now and go, I don't know what I was thinking. Or the same could be true for moments when you felt disconnected. You look back at certain moments and you cringe, but I want you to ask yourself, are there moments back on your journey as you reflect across that timeline that cause you to cringe about how you thought about the world or how you saw things? My guess is that for the vast majority of you, that's probably true. It is for me. But here's the thing I want to invite you to do. I want to invite you to have compassion on your own journey. Wherever you've been before, or wherever you're at right now in your journey, what if you just allowed yourself to have compassion on your journey and let it be what it actually is? A journey. Now, here's the second part of the exercise. I want you to think of people in your life. Maybe they're family members or loved ones. Maybe they're coworkers or just old friends that you interact with on social media. Maybe they aren't even really friends. They're just random people that you choose to read whatever they post. But regardless, they're the people that make you tense up. They're the ones that make you cringe, where you find yourself thinking and saying, like, how can they think that way? How can they be so blind? How could they have voted for that person? And you find it so incredibly maddening because something in you feels like it's your responsibility to help them see things in a much more loving, awakening, mature way like you do. And no matter what you say or what you do, they just don't get it. So here's the thing. What if you allowed yourself to have compassion on their journey? To have compassion on their own journeys? That just like you have moments in your past where you look back and maybe cringe because of how you saw the world, what if you extend that same compassion to them, to wherever they're at on their journey? Now, here's a key distinction that I think is helpful to understand. And author Rob Bell, he helped me to understand this back a while ago, and it's been a really helpful filter for me. That if there is an issue of public policy, or you're a part of an organization or an institution or a council where the need for justice and equality of certain people or different people is being debated or at stake, then absolutely give your most compelling arguments and advocate boldly for that perspective and for that truth. Fight justly for justice in the ways that you are able. Absolutely. We have to do that. As Jesus followers, that's what we have to do. But that's not what I'm referring to here. I'm referring to that relational space between you and that other person that came to mind when you think, what in the world are they thinking? They just drive me crazy with the way that they see the world. I'm talking about that space between your heart and theirs. What if you and I stopped trying to control them? What if we didn't take on the responsibility of being the one who has to change their mind and we just let them have their own journey? Because here's the thing. When they do that same thing to you, when they do it to me, we hate it, right? I mean, even though they think they're being helpful, they think they're being loving, you and I still hate it, and it doesn't actually work. So what we have to remember is it doesn't feel like love when you and I do it to them either. So instead, we just have to let them have their own journey. Now, letting them have their own journey may mean that you put some strong boundaries in place. That could be necessary. Things that you talk about and things that you don't talk about. how often you see each other communicate or how little that you do, or whether you do that at all. But it also doesn't mean that you may never get a chance to talk about it. Instead, what you do is you step into that space when you're invited to step into that space. When someone invites you in, when someone says, I don't see it that way, but I'd like to understand your perspective, or I'm curious how you shifted and came to that understanding, then great, lean into those moments because, again, you've been invited into that space. But when you and I start to fill up with so much resentment toward people, and I think so many of us find ourselves there today, where we find ourselves so filled with resentment at people and so exhausted that whoever, this person or that person, this group of people, they just won't get it. I think it's good for us to take a step back and reflect on, what does it look like for me to have compassion on this person's journey, rather than taking on the responsibility and weight of trying to change how they currently see the world when they have not invited me into it. And when we do that, perhaps you and I will find ourselves a little bit more free, a little less wound up all the time, a little less filled with resentment, and able to love much better when we choose to set these other people free and let them have their own journeys. So, let's close our time together by just taking a few moments to reflect on that and pray together. God, would you give us the grace to have compassion on our own journeys, to have the patience with ourselves that you have with us. And God, would you give us the courage and the wisdom to have that kind of compassion on others, for that particular person or a few people that come to mind that just drive us crazy and that we feel so exhausted or hurt by or wounded by because of the way that they see the world and the way that they think. And we've taken on the responsibility of trying to change their mind without being invited in that space. God, would you give us the courage to set them free, to let them have their own journey? And God, may we discover that we're the ones freed in that process. We pray all this in the reputation and character of the resurrecting Christ Jesus. Amen.
If you would like to know more or get connected to Crosspointe, go to crosspointenc.org. If you're in need of care or assistance, go to crosspointe.org/care. And welcome home.